and welcome back to my channel. I am very excited for my next project, which is going to be a corset top. I originally wanted to make an Edwardian corset, but after thinking about its practicality, I settled on a corset top instead. And I got this fabric right here, which I think is so pretty. It has gold, it has flowers, and it's pink. And I want to decorate it to make it look really nice too. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And let's get started. For the pattern, I used the corset top pattern that I already happen to have, but I altered it a little bit to make the front less pointy, and I also added seam allowance in the front center because I wanted to add a busk there. And I cut out 2 of each piece from the main fabric and 2 of each piece from the lining, which I used a bed sheet that I had. I got 1 yard of this fabric, which was obviously too much, but I would rather have too much than not enough, so I always get a bit more than I think I'll need, and you never know when I'll mess up. I like using bed sheets as lining because they just look like plain white fabric, so you can never tell that it used to be a bed sheet. And they are way cheaper and you get way more than actual lining that you can get at the fabric store. And this is what all the pieces looked like after they were cut out. Next, I added interfacing to all the lining pieces. Ideally, I would want to add it to the main fabric, but I was afraid that the heat would be too much and ruin that fabric. So that's why I did it to the lining. And you want to make sure that you make all the pieces mirrored. Then I put together the side front, side, and side back seams and sewed them together. I did this for the lining as well, using a basic straight stitch. Then in the lower corner of the lining, I sewed in my little tag. I made sure it was far enough in so that it wouldn't interfere with the seam allowance. I sewed down the seam allowance of the main fabric pieces so that it would look nicer and lay flatter because I didn't really want to risk ironing it down. And I think I did it about 1/4 of an inch from the seams. And after this step, this is what all the pieces were looking like. I then added in all the boning. I put 1 piece for each seam, and I made it short enough so that it wouldn't interfere with the top seam allowance. But I didn't have seam allowance along the bottom of the corset top, so it can go all the way down there. And I ironed it down to flatten out the curve it had and sewed it down to the seam allowance of the lining. And you also want to make sure to round out the edges of the boning before sewing it in so that it doesn't poke through the fabric later. I could now attach the lining to the main fabric, and since I was going to add the busk, I took the side with the holes and marked out where I needed to leave an opening for the part sticking out to go through. I put it up to the fabric and traced the busk and didn't sew where I didn't trace. And as you saw, I pinned together the rest of this half of the top because I will be sewing all that as well. I cut the corner and cut in notches so that I could turn it right side out. I took my busk and inserted it where the holes were, and it should fit in perfectly, which it did. I needed to sew right next to it so that it stays in place, so I changed to a zipper fit and sewed right next to it. Be careful not to sew on it because I have done that before and it will only result in a broken needle. I did the same exact thing to the other side of the top, except for this side I didn't need to mark out holes for the busk and instead just sewed all the way around. I put the other side of the busk up to the one I just sewed and marked where all the holes went. Then I poked the hole in the dots I marked so that the side of the busk with the pegs could go through it. Make sure that you are very careful and make the hole bigger only little by little because you can always make them bigger but not smaller. Once the holes were in place, I put the busk through, and just like I did for the other side, I top stitched right next to it so that it stays in place. Now it should fit perfectly together, and then I also added emboning to the back because I'm going to add in grommets for the lace up part, and we want to make sure that that part stays nice and strong. Then I put in all the grommets. I put them in the back as well as on the straps, and I made sure they were all equally spaced. And I would highly recommend practicing first on a scrap piece of fabric if you've never done this before doing it on the actual top. This is how it looks now, and next I needed to bind the bottom edges. I cut out strips of fabric and sewed it to the wrong side of the top before flipping it over to the right side and top stitching it down, and since it was too wide I did trim down the strip. I needed to hand sew the part that went on the busk because again there was no way to sew through the metal with my sewing machine. I forgot to film myself cutting out the sleeves, but I basically just cut out 2 long puff sleeve pieces out of this lacy fabric and then sewed the sleeve seams using French seams. I then gathered the armhole part with a basting stitch and then pinned the right side of the sleeve to the wrong side of the top. I did that because the armhole of the top already had a finished edge, so I felt like it would look better if I didn't make more seam allowance with it. And so basically I just top stitched the sleeves in place. I hemmed the bottom of the sleeves, and to make the channel for the elastic, I cut out a long strip of white fabric and ironed down both sides. I sewed it about 2 centimeters from the edge of the sleeves so that it creates a little ruffle when I put the elastic through. I cut pieces of elastic the size of my wrist and used a safety pin to put it all the way through the channel. I put the pin to secure the elastic once the end of the elastic reached the beginning of the channel so that it stays in place while I thread the rest of the elastic through the channel. And once it was all the way through, I used a zigzag stitch to connect the elastic into one loop. It was now almost done. I just needed to add the finishing touch, which was to put this lace all the way around the neckline of the top. I folded over the beginning and end of the lace, and I hand sewed where it was over the busk, but otherwise I used my sewing machine to top stitch it all in place. And once that was done, this corset top was complete. I think it turned out so pretty, and I am really glad I chose the fabric that I did because it really gave it the look I was going for. I also think the lace around the neckline really added a nice touch. Thanks for sticking to the end, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe. See you next time!